and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. My name is Nils Vinje, and today my guest is Francois Dellea. Francois, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Hey, I'm excited to dig into all things leadership with you. But first, Francois, would you share with us the role that you're in and the company that you work for today?
Sure. So I'm a senior director of engineering for Archipelago. We're a small company located in San Francisco. We're fully remote. We are about 150 people right now. We actually did a public launch in about August of 2020. So we're kind of in our, I would say, early stages of the startup. So
that's wonderful. Okay, so you actually did a public launch coming out in August of 2020, which was kind of a challenging time in the world.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about the problem that you're solving and how, and so we can understand how well that launch mapped out.
That launch went. Okay, so yeah, so Archipelago is focusing on changing how commercial properties are insured. We are using ML and AI to improve the data and analyze the risk involved. So we are currently, have trillions of dollars on the platform. We are supporting some of the largest industry owners, brokers, and insurers. So we are attempting to fix the data and then enhance it. Right now, with the climate change and all the risk involved, there's a lot of data that's, involved in terms of dealing with this sort of property. So we actually, are trying to improve that space. It's a space that maybe it's a little bit left behind. So we've been focusing on that area.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And in, August of 2020 and over the last couple of years, commercial real estate's been turned upside down. So I got to imagine that the approach that you're taking and how you're helping these companies is probably pretty well received, given that they don't really and can't operate in the same exact way they used to pre-pandemic. Is that right?
Yeah, that is correct. In some cases, even the industry has been, they've been using like Excel spreadsheets and things like that to manage the data, right? So having a platform that not only improves the quality of the data and makes it, very visual and easy to understand and analyze helps a lot. On top of that, we do a lot of things to just improve the quality of it. Something simple is, for example, you can take the lat long of a building, like the longitude and longitude, and from there you can actually understand, for example, if it's on a hurricane path, how close it is to the ocean, is it near an earthquake fault? Those are basic stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that we do to kind of bring more awareness of the risk involved when you're dealing with these big buildings.
That's fascinating. Yeah, risk on the building side, risk on the people side, risk on the tenant side, and you're bringing that all together in one place to keep track of it.
Yes. So overall, we've been very well received, and the company, again, we've been scaling rapidly, growing rapidly. The engineering team kind of doubled in size within the last year, and I'm assuming we're probably going to double again by the end of next year, I would say.
Wow, that's exciting. And to do that in launch in the middle of the heart of the craziest time there ever was in recent memory, speaks volumes to the problem that you're solving. So
right. So thank you.
Awesome. All right, so let's rewind the clock a little bit, and we'd love to hear about how you got into your very first leadership position.
So the very first leadership position, it kind of happened more, I would say, more by mistake, to be honest with you, because I used to be a developer, like as any developer, I used to, like I enjoyed what I did. And as I got better and became more senior, more and more responsibilities started landing on my lap. So I started, taking on more responsibility initially on the technical side, architecting the solution and things like that. And then, kind of getting more involved with the business and understanding that, and then kind of, I, gradually started getting more and more pulled into that role. So I got promoted into becoming a tech lead. And eventually then, once I was leading the projects, and I started having people report to me. Yep. And that's kind of when it hit me that I'm actually in leadership. I'm not, I'm not a developer anymore.
And what about that shift was different when you were going through that? You know, all of a sudden you were a developer, and now all of a sudden you got people that are reporting into you. What had to change for you? And let's just start there. What had to change for you?
Yeah, so well, initially, I think it's like the first thing I you realize is that you are, how can I say, you are basically, you know, not responsible for your own faith anymore, right? As a
Mm,
developer, you can be as good as you want with your craft. You can, read as many books or practice or whatever it is. But as a leader, you need a completely different set of tools to manage and inspire. And you're getting judged sometimes not by your performance, but the performance of the team you're managing, right?
right.
Or how well the project is going, are you delivering, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So yeah, at the beginning, I think it just takes a mind shift to kind of realize that and then start focusing on other things, right?
What enabled you to realize and make that transition that now all of a sudden you're going to be judged by the performance of your team as opposed to being judged by the performance of your contributions?
Okay, so one of the things I remember initially, I had a team. I think we were about five developers that I was managing, and one of the developers, the CTO, came and asked them to work on some scaling issues. We were again, this is the time I was at LoopNet. We were kind of growing rapidly, and we were having some issues with the code. And so he came directly and asked the developer, "Hey, work on this thing, kind of get it done." And I said, "Okay." The CTO came and asked them and stuff like that. Kind of let him do their thing. He's getting directions. He knows what he's doing. And eventually, then I found myself getting questions from the business side. Like my PM came along and said, "Hey, why is he working on this? When is it going to be done?" And then all of a sudden it kind of hit me. I'm like, okay, I'm not really involved, but yeah, this person reports to me. I should be knowing all this stuff and managing mainly the expectations with the business than anything else, right? So that to me was at the beginning a very uh, I would say a wake up call to to say, oh wait a second, right? Um, so that kind of initially then inspired me to kind of be more involved and provide support for the rest of the team, whether I was managing the project directly or indirectly, because in this
Yeah.
case like it was kind of something that I saw, it's on the technical side, we don't have to worry about that, right? And then it became kind of a big deal.
Wow. Okay, so in that transition going from the developer to the team lead and now you kind of have this realization about you are going to be judged and you are responsible for the output of this team. And you mentioned that when you make this shift, you need a different set of tools than being a developer, right? A set of leadership tools. So how did you navigate, going from the point of being an individual contributor to now being a leader in terms of the acquisition of tools that would support you in having a team of five reporting to you?
Yeah, so well, that's a good thing. I mean, I think it happens gradually, right? Like it's something that you learn, I think, over time now, looking back at it. I initially the first thing I started reading different business books and different
Mm-hmm.
philosophy on leadership, on management, on communication, right? And kind of getting more information. From there, to me, I think you have to form your own philosophy of what it takes to be a leader, right? How do you actually decide, okay, how do you want to manage, right? Because there's different, you can be very hands off, you can be very hands on, you can be, and things like that. And then try to figure out what your leadership style is. So that's kind
Mm-hmm.
of where I focused on and saying, all right. And then over time, you realize that, to me, I think two keys to success is one is trying to tailor your leadership style to bring the best out of people.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, each person on your team usually has a um, very different expectations on what their boss should be doing, right?
That is true.
So some developers, for example, in my case, needed a lot of support. They want to have communications every step they took. They wanted validation. And then I had other developers that say, "Hey, just I know what I'm doing. Stay out of my way. Leave me alone," kind of thing. So, and those things are very, very opposite, right? So you have to figure out, okay, what's the right balance there of involvement, right? versus not involvement and things like that. And basically try to figure out what the support you have to provide to make the person successful. Because if you know they are successful by default, then you're going to be successful, right?
Right.
So
right.
you have to try to figure out the expectations are. With some people, it's very easy because they tell you. Other people, you have to figure out, things as you go along, as you get to know them, and then kind of build a relationship. So that was the first aspect of it. The second aspect, I think, it was also the expectations. I think it's managing expectations, managing up and managing down the expectations. I put it that way. Just because everybody kind of has their own take sometimes on different projects. And for example, I realized early in my career that if you're not managing those, the team could be doing a fantastic job delivering the code for example, on time. But if you're building the wrong feature or it's not the right thing, right, then usually you're not delivering results. So, right. So you have to find that balance of saying, all right, how do you manage the expectations of what the business wants, of what maybe your CTO or the CEO, like you kind of have to understand also managing the developers' expectations on the project and things like that, right? Knowing when to push to get something out versus when to actually, go back. And to me, it's it's a balancing act at all levels, right? Keeping people happy and having them not work, crazy hours, and keeping the business happy and not, putting the team in a weird spot when, they're not set up to succeed.
Yeah, I think a balancing act is a terrific phrase to use to sum up a lot of leadership. It is a gigantic balancing act across all fronts. And you hit on a number of really key pieces there. Number one, tailoring your persona or your approach to each individual person. And two, managing expectations up and down. I want to drill into the tailoring, the different expectations for the different people and tailoring that to you a little bit. And you mentioned that some people are going to come right out and tell you, here's what I need, here's what I want, etc. But for those who might be a little bit more reserved or who might be a little bit less confident in telling their manager, here's what I need, how would you go about the conversation? And maybe think about, somebody listening to this podcast saying, all right, I know there's some people on my team. I don't know exactly what they expect out of me. I'm not exactly sure how to have that conversation.
Right.
What advice would you share with them on how to have that conversation to get that out?
So initially, I think you kind of have to. So there's two things I usually do. One is try to get to know the person at a personal level, kind of understanding, okay, what's his situation, what's his background, where is he from, where did he grow up, does he have a family, does he have kids, right? So there's a lot of different variables sometimes. So knowing a little of that sometimes gives you a lot of context of how to manage. The other aspect of it initially at the beginning is, I would say, setting the right expectations, right? I go back to that because I think to me is key, right? If he could be a great developer, but if he's not providing you what you need, right, then is not. And then the person can't provide what you need unless you communicate that with them and get some agreement, right? So if you're expecting them to, I don't know, let you know when the task is done, or let you know when the certain things happen, or et cetera, right? Like you have to try out different things and work with them, and then initially obviously start with basic expectations, and as you go from there, then continue to expand on that and work on those things. Usually I think that when you have I want to say the annual review, but if you have the one-on-ones with the person, then you can kind of do it over time, right? Like you don't have to overwhelm the person at the very beginning. Okay, tell me what you want, tell me what you need, right? Like you kind of have to start slow and then iterate on the approach, and then, kind of be observant, right? Kind of let the person talk. I mean, and listen. I think being a good listener and trying to understand is like, okay, what's working and what's not. So you kind of then figure out, okay, you start looking at how much they're producing, how well they're executing, right? And If not, then you look for room for improvements to have conversations there, not to come down and say, hey, you didn't do it, but it's like, hey, I think you could have done better here. Where could I helped you? Did you need something specific? Or hey, were the requirements clear? Or
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
the process? And usually having those sort of conversations more as a curiosity, then usually people will open up and tell you different things, and kind of going from there. But the key there is keeping in mind that everyone is different, right? So it's like you have to also going back to the balancing act, trying to try to figure out the person, right? Some people will tell you certain things, other people won't.
Yeah, great point. And hearing you describe that brings up a very similar concept that I've dealt with for a long time, and it's called the social contract. It essentially means it's the unspoken agreement between two parties. And the challenge and the risk here, which you're highlighting, is that it's unspoken. And
Right.
so if you have an expectation of your team or a team member to do something a certain way and they don't live up to that expectation, because they in part don't know it because it was never spoken or made clear,
Right.
that's an opportunity for you to be disappointed or an expectation of yours not be met. Now the interesting thing is the same thing happens on the other side. Individuals all have expectations of you as the leader, and if you don't know what they are, you can't possibly live up to them either. Right?
That is correct. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So a lot of the stuff you need to start figuring out how to communicate those things
Yes.
and trying to kind of get on the same page, right?
Yeah.
It's not a one way street,
Right.
because you also sometimes your expectations could change, right? Because I think sometimes if the person is like, okay, I hate to do things this way, or I hate to do that, right? You can be flexible there. Okay, well, let's find a common ground where we can
Mm-hmm.
work together and both get what we need.
Yeah. And bringing that to the surface, right? It's about making the unspoken spoken, and when we make the unspoken spoken and give people an opportunity to share what their expectations of you as the leader are, then you might find out some very interesting things you never knew
Right,
existed.
correct. I mean, that's kind of going back to sometimes you have certain assumptions, or you
Yes.
think certain things are common sense, but what might be common sense to you might not be common sense to the person that you're managing, right? So
Right.
usually I like to be on the things that for me are non-negotiable, more explicit about those.
Yeah.
And
Great
then I
point.
have a lot of other expectations that to me are more like nice to haves. Okay, if you
Yeah.
do that, that would be great. But if you don't, then okay, I'll live with it. No big deal.
Not a big deal. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Good. So on the second point of managing expectations, both up and down, we talked a little bit now just about the down part. Let's talk more about the up part, and perhaps if there's an example or principle that you follow when thinking about managing expectations going up the chain to your boss and bosses above, and how to successfully navigate that from a leadership perspective, where you're trying to make sure the team is whole and focused on what they need to do, but perhaps there is some missed expectation or something that needs to be adjusted going back up to the top of the organization. How would you approach that kind of situation?
Yeah. So that's a good one. A lot of the things I would say, some of it depends on the company, right?
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the company and the politics and how it's set up, and who's actually making the calls and things like that, right? So sometimes you have to know who is actually in some projects, who is actually the sponsor of the
Mm-hmm.
project, someone who actually cares or doesn't care about certain details and things like that. So you have to be aware, I think, when you're managing up. I don't want to say which leaders cares and which leaders don't, but you kind of have to be aware of where the communication is, and from there, then trying to uh, meet the expectations or trying to get in on the same page. Because some leaders maybe at that level maybe only care, hey, about the delivery or certain aspects of the project, not really all the details or things like that, right? So you have to, I think, adjust your communication to provide the right info,
Mm-hmm.
up the chain. When you're talking more about lateral teams and things like that, sometimes, I don't know, if you're working on a software buy, you need to talk to the marketing team. Okay. I usually try to tailor a lot of the information to what I think is relevant for that, and then open the dialogue to say, okay, you have specific questions about, certain things and things like that, then kind of go deeper. But at the beginning, I usually test the waters, staying at a high level, kind of understanding and seeing, okay, how much involvement do they want? And then if they're the ultimate sponsor and things like that, I usually like to do demos or get them involved and seeing, hey, here's what we're building. Does this look like what we're expecting or not? Because any early feedback you could get, it could save you weeks or months of work. So, if you need to shift direction, if you need to reassess stuff, if you need to go back to, I don't know, if you need to ask for more resource, whatever it is, the sooner you know it, the sooner you can deal with that and not put the team in a weird position, right? So it's different when you have to go back to the team and say, hey guys, we need to, I don't know, redo this part of the software. It's easier when they have, time to deal with that, rather than saying, all right, well, we need it by next week, right? And then now everyone's freaking out, or hey, we're going to delay the launch because whatever. So usually the sooner I see an opportunity to kind of manage those expectations, I usually try to do that just to make sure that there's no surprises. At all levels. So I think you have to manage up and down, and I guess now that I think about it, also sideways.
You manage, it's the balancing act, right?
It is. I mean, going back to that, yes, it definitely is. I mean, and every project is different, right? So I think being aware that sometimes whatever worked on one project might not work in another one, right? So you have to be very conscious of that and not, kind of stuck at doing things a certain way, because they might not.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And the fact that even though conceptually the role might be very similar, or even the project might be similar, right? The stakeholders, the objectives, the results, the team, what they're actually doing, they're always going to be different. Right.
Exactly.
And to treat them as such, I really like what you said, how it's very similar to what you were talking about with the team. Even when it comes to managing up, it's about tailoring your message and tailoring your approach and tailoring what you're going to share to the recipient, right? It's about customizing the message in order to make sure it resonates with that particular individual at the level of detail that they are capable or want to hear.
Correct. Yes. I mean, and again, it's sometimes it even boils down to, again, I think I know I keep going back to expectations, but expectations, I think, plays a big role, right? Because I mean, they give you, an example. See, if you're expecting, I don't know, a team, I'll use a weird analogy, but like if you're expecting them to, I don't know, paint the wall, right, and they're like redoing the floor, no matter how well you redo the floor, right, you're never going to succeed, because the expectations is for you to paint the wall. So it doesn't matter, how well you execute, how many people you talk to, what is the perfect plan, how much money you save, any of that, right? Because so you're gonna deliver the wrong stuff. So making sure that there's no surprises along the way, it goes a long way, and communicating, if there's bad news, communicating them as early as possible gives you a chance not only for whoever's involved to digest the news and have more ways out, right, than at last minute.
Yeah, the example you just gave with painting the wall, I think is a perfect illustration, and it happens all the time, right?
Yes.
Hey, wait! I thought I told you guys to paint the wall. What are you doing on the floor? Well, you said to make the room look better, so we thought this was the best way to go.
Right, exactly, and sometimes that's driven by the business. Sometimes it's driven by the developers, because they're like, oh, it'd be great if we do this or we do that,
right,
and all those things. So sometimes you get scope creep from different sides, right, or things along the line, right? So to me, I think that you have to focus on what matters, and sometimes getting those last few pieces and make sure that everybody is on the same page
So
makes a huge difference.
So this, I want to peel that back a little bit and making sure everybody's on the same page throughout the whole, whatever it is, project, sprint,
Yes.
whatever time period you're looking at. So from an engineering perspective, how do you look at that when there are a million different ways to solve a particular problem, right? There's lots of ways to make the room look better. There's lots of ways to paint the wall.
Right.
How do you, one, set and agree on expectations with the team up front and then ensure that at various checkpoints or something, that is actually going to happen so that you get to the end with a painted wall instead of a nice new floor?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. I think you have to have regular check-ins, whether you're
Mm-hmm.
doing sprints or if you're doing projects, depending on how you're managing the teams. There's different philosophies there. But trying to get small pieces where you can iterate. I think iterating is a key to anything, right? If I build, a couple of things, getting feedback on that, even if you might not think it's useful, I think it's good to get at least the expectations right across. Especially if you're working in an agile environment, if you're doing demos or you're iterating, then if you need to shift or change there, then it's easier to convey that message because they're seeing it all along, right? Like they can't be surprised when you show them at the very end. Okay, here's what we build. They're not going to be like, "Oh, what the hell did you do?" Right?
Yeah.
So now you've been seeing it every week or every 2 weeks or however
Mm-hmm.
often, right? And then also trying to, I'm of the philosophy of trying to work on the hardest part at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of take the most challenging aspect of a project and tackling that first, if possible, because then it's very easy to estimate and deal with the rest of the project.
Yeah.
So if you have the biggest unknown, usually you try to tackle that in the early stages of the project. Once you get to the hurdle, then the project, I mean, might not be in cruise control, but it's going to be definitely a lot more predictable to
Yeah.
see where you're going to end up, right? Managing and everything else like that. And I think it puts you in a much better position overall.
Agree. And that predictable piece is key, right? If you're setting expectations and gaining agreement with the team on what is going to be done, the complement is then the accountability. And then if as leaders, if we're holding people accountable to the thing with which we all agreed to that was clear and made sure that they knew it was the wall that was to be painted and not the floor to be redone, right?
Right.
And we hold them accountable, then we have a much
Right.
greater chance of predictability that we're going to get a great wall in the end.
That's right. That is correct.
Okay, awesome. All right, great. And I agree 100%. I actually call in my book I wrote about setting expectations and driving accountability and called them the secret sauce parts 1 and 2. Because if you
Yes.
can nail from a leadership perspective, if you can nail setting expectations and driving accountability, everything else gets easier and gets a lot more predictable. It's when usually what I see in the vast majority of leaders that I've worked with over the last decade plus has been a lack of the accountability. Expectations usually go okay. Like everybody can set expectations. The accountability piece that can be a little bit more tricky, even though it's already really set up for success if you do the expectations piece right, which is kind of why it's a combo.
Right. Right. And the accountability. I mean, going back, to my early days, like no matter whose fault it is, right? If you're leading the project, you're ultimately responsible for it. Whether
Yeah.
so
Mm-hmm.
that's the part like I think you need to accept at the beginning. And I think for people that are actually getting into this role, that like you usually want to make sure that you you wear multiple hats. So you wear you do whatever you need to do to make the project successful.
Yep.
So in some cases, it might be interacting more with the business to clear requirements. In some cases, you might be, I don't know, testing. In some environments, you might be coding, right? Like it depends. But as a leader of a team, you're ultimately responsible for the results of
Yeah.
what the team is producing. Therefore, you want to figure out what are the areas that need the most help, and then usually help there, right?
Yep.
If
Right.
the team is executing fantastic and everyone is doing great, you just stay out of the way.
Yeah, just keep driving accountability, and
Yes.
you're golden.
Don't,
You're golden.
don't get involved. But other than that,
Don't mess up what's already working.
right, exactly. So, but usually that's I think a key. Going back to the balancing communication is like you have to figure out what are the potential risk in the project, and depending on what kind of stuff you're managing, it could be all the way from cost to execution or anything in between. And then as a leader, it's your job to figure out, all right, how do we fix this?
Yeah, love it. All right, Francois, last question here. If you could go back in time, sit down with your younger self at perhaps that early time when you were a developer, about to be promoted to the team lead and take over a leadership position, but you could take all the experiences and understandings and all the knowledge that you have today and sit down with your younger self, what advice would you share with your younger self?
Well, that's a great question. I think I would just say that there's no there's no black and white in leadership. Like basically, there's no right or wrong way of doing it, right? Like I think you have to do a lot of self-reflection, I would say, and stuff like that. Initially at the beginning, I don't know, being a developer coming from a technical background, you learn how to code a certain way, and you say, okay, this is the most efficient way of doing this, is the most efficient way of doing that, right? And then you are set in your ways. As a leader, it took me a while to kind of understand that it's like, okay, there's no wrong or right way. Like you have to, everyone has different expectations. There's feelings involved, and people are different culturally, and in all kinds of levels, right? So recognizing that and being able to not get stuck doing things a certain way. Over the years, you learn it's like, okay, like sometimes, what worked in one company might not work in another company, where the expectations are different, and all these different things that you kind of have to adjust. So at the beginning, say, hey, I read this in this book, or I did this this worked with me in the past, I'm going to do exactly the same thing, and then failing completely, right? So I think it's like the advice I would give my younger self is like not to get stuck to one solution, and reevaluate, all the time. The culture is changing now with the remote environments. The communication is different. Not being in the office and then seeing people every day, right? So you have to, as a leader, constantly evolve and reevaluate all your tool set, and keep adding new stuff, to your thing. So I'm constantly trying to learn, read books and hear other people's, experiences and stuff like that, and picking what I like and discarding what I don't like, and kind of forming my own opinions, right? So
wonderful advice, Francois. Well, thank you so much for sharing that incredible advice with us, along with everything else you shared on this episode. Wonderful to get a chance to spend some time with you, learn about your past, and have the fact that there is no one perfect right answer. There is no black and white in leadership. It's a lot of experimentation, a lot of finding out what works for you. And I love what you said about keeping on pushing and always learning new things to try and to figure out what works best for you. So thanks so much for sharing your time with us, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thank you so much. I love the show. Thank you.
Take care.